Thank you. So we will end on a really positive note, which is disasters. This is work that's done in a collaboration with a number of co-authors here, including a couple here in the room. Uh, it's an example of using a large panel like an online panel like UAS to develop novel sampling frames using screener questions for the types of research questions that we might want to ask. So in this case, we're interested in testing a theoretical account of age differences in emotional well-being and people's response to disasters. But we need first to find those people. This is work that data that were collected through the Free Minutes program. So thanks to UAS and CSER, and through them, NIA and SSA for the support. This was a really interesting example of something where we came with a nice idea and then spent a fair amount of time working with the UAS team to come up with an even better idea. We did a paper a few years ago last year was published, that used a different sample. The strong sample is a regionally representative sample of individuals who live along the US Gulf Coast, which is a particularly disaster-prone region. And we found that those with hurricane experience, those experiences negatively impacted their subsequent mental health, which is not terribly surprising. But what is surprising is that negative effect was less with older adults. And this was consistent with one of the theoretical accounts that we were interested in, but the mechanisms of that account were unmeasured in the strong survey. It also just focused on hurricanes, and we were interested in more generally in extreme weather events. And that led us to this idea. So we've already talked about the Free Minutes program, so I'm not going to go over that. We added to the monthly survey, which we heard about earlier today, the US monthly survey, basically two questions. In the last month, did you experience any extreme weather events? Yes, no. If so, what type? Check all that apply. And if so, did you experience any consequences of those extreme weather events? Yes or no. And if so, what type? Check all that apply. This was added to the monthly survey for 12 months from last August through this coming July, in part because many of these events are not only geographically specific, but seasonally specific. We are sampling across those experiences in each of the months to develop a sample, using as a sampling frame for a follow-on survey on those mechanistic questions. I'm not going to be talking about those today. I'm really talking about the screeners because those are important in their own right. I'm interested in them in particular because subjective extreme weather experiences often differs in important ways from the official accounts that we have, for instance, in federal data sets. And it's one of the points of contention between communities and emergency management community is that disaster declarations, release of FEMA individual assistance, after the event, estimates of financial damages really don't capture the nuances of the experiences that people have. So we want to capture some of that. We would like to know to what extent these events make sense with respect to what objective data we have, but also where they differ, what does that add potentially? So first of all, what were the experiences? We have data so far from August through January. Because of the monthly survey, we're getting about 9,000 or 10,000 respondents per wave per month. Overall, just under 12,000 have responded to at least one of these surveys. If you look at the second row of data here, you can see the percentage who said yes to extreme weather event varies widely from month to month, but overall, just under half of our sample has said yes in at least 1 month. Of those individuals who said yes, about a third of them said that they experienced one or more consequences of those events, or about 17% of the overall sample. On the left-hand side of this figure, you can see the response options for what type of event. And there's some important things I want to point out here. First of all, seasonality. At the top, you see quite a bit of representation for extreme heat and severe storm in August and September. That declines with months. And you see the rise at the bottom of winter storm and extreme cold in December and January, just as you'd expect. But the spikes are also particularly interesting. In October, November, we see a big spike in hurricane corresponding to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. There's a spike in earthquake in September, corresponding to a couple of modest earthquakes in California. And in January, you can really see the spike in wildfires happening. So how does this correspond to what objective data we have? And I'm going to draw on one particular data set, FEMA's National Risk Index, for this. The NRI provides estimates of the state, county, and tract level for 19 different natural hazards. You can see them listed in the left-hand side of that table there. On the right-hand side are our response options to our questions, and it's not one-to-one, but I'm going to focus on two of them here, hurricane and wildfire. And here, as I mentioned before, I'm interested in both similarities, which can help us sort of get a sense of the validity of responses. Are we seeing these events being reported in areas that have substantial risk? What the NRI is providing us is a historical account of risk in an area. This is an area that has seen a lot of hurricanes in the past, for example. And I'm also interested in differences to capture temporal idiosyncrasies. So this is for hurricanes in October and November. Well, on the right-hand side, first of all, that's the NRI, one of the scores from the NRI for hurricanes, with darker blue being higher risk. And you can, as you expect, more hurricanes along the Gulf Coast, eastern seaboard, and to a lesser extent, Hawaii. On the left-hand side is just the hurricane responses for October, November, when hurricanes Helene and Milton hit. And you see the responses being primarily in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, which were most heavily damaged by those hurricanes. For wildfire, again, on the right-hand side, you see widespread historical risk patterns. On the left-hand side, I'm being a little cagey and leaving January out of these data. This is just August through December, and we can see that this season was more constrained to the Northwest, and particularly Idaho. But that brings me to the question of what new information do this subjective experience data provide? First of all, to some extent, it's temporal resolution. This is January for wildfire. And you can clearly see the effect of the LA wildfires. We're only plotting the data at the state level at this point. We tend to go down to the county level. We'll come back to that in a moment. I expect that to cluster in Southwest California. The other major piece of new information that's provided here is the consequences question. This is nowhere in the federal data for the most part. And again, on the left-hand side are the different response options, with a few added that were based on the other specifies that we recoded. But not as much seasonality, but a lot of interesting variability. Most common were loss of power and other utilities, inability to spend time outdoors. Again, this is something that does not show up in official statistics for the most part. Loss and damage to property, health problems to additional debt, et cetera. We also see some interesting specific patterns. In January, we see a big spike in reports in inability to be outside. That corresponds to the time of the wildfires, but also some pretty dramatic cold waves that happened in the rest of the country. I know in Pittsburgh, where I live, it was pretty miserable to be outside in January. We see a lot of property loss in October and November when Helene and Milton tore through the southeast. And now those were very damaging storms that covered a very wide geographic area. We saw a lot, relatively speaking, a lot of reported evacuation in exactly those months that I've been talking about, October, November, and January. So what do we do next? Well, first of all, and again, I'm building off of what was talked about this morning, we need to go down to closer geographic resolution. We need to go into the data enclave, and we're setting that up for this project as we speak. We plan a series of predictive analyses, including seasonality, geographic risk, and a range of individual demographics. And once all the data are in through July, we plan to return to that theoretical question. Is emotional coping and future time perspective, these are the two mechanisms that were proposed by, that we were interested in looking at, do those help account for age differences and disaster impacts on well-being? I finished ahead of time. That has never happened.